After nearly 10 years of service, struggle, and sacrifice, we know well the costs of war. These efforts weigh on me every time I, as Commander-in-Chief, have to sign a letter to a family that has lost a loved one, or look into the eyes of a service member who's been gravely wounded. So Americans understand the costs of war.
America, the country as a whole, understand the physical cost of war, but we don't understand the mental and emotional cost of war, and those scars do not heal. This mental and emotional wound is called PTSD.
So PTSD is the acronym for post-traumatic stress disorder, which historically was initially called shell shock syndrome, which came from Vietnam. And then they realized that it was more people experience trauma than just being in the war. And so basically from a diagnostic perspective, the main criteria of PTSD is that a person is exposed to or witnesses something traumatic that jeopardizes or that they feel their safety or their well-being is at harm.
20% of all Iraq and Afghanistan veterans have PTSD, and not all of them seek help.
There's really nothing exactly like that for states of depression, and that's what we've got to figure out: is how do you get the entire force, not just the leaders. The leaders understand it. No, that's not true. The leaders understand the significance of it. I'm not sure we really understand the depth and breadth of the issue.
The VA has been underestimating the severity and magnitude of PTSD affecting our troops.
And in the past, that was considered that people were ill or sick. But the paradigm shift has been that, again, like I said, it's not necessarily what's wrong with the person, but what's happened to the person.
They were up there for the next year. They had no running water, so they didn't bathe for a month at a time. That was the rotation in and out of the main base. They had no cooked food. They had no internet. They had no phone. For the first few months, they didn't even have electricity. They managed to build some plywood hooches with some gasoline heaters in there, so they had a little bit of warmth during the winter. They were on Mars, basically. And so they couldn't call their girlfriends for a month at a time. They had no television. They had nothing that's entertaining or lighthearted, or all they had was each other.
We really need to continue to learn about what's happening. Now, look, some of it is societal.
But our society doesn't necessarily, I don't want to say value, but they don't necessarily put mental health as a very high priority. I always tell people, it's like if, and this is from a colleague of mine, that if we were to put in terms of the effects of a trauma in like a physical comparison, that it would be like someone being hit by a Mack truck and totally, in the hospital for months and months. And in that case, insurance would cover, society would probably come and bring them food every day, and people would bring them flowers, whereas if someone goes into trauma recovery or is in an inpatient or residential facility for trauma recovery or any of the other, unfortunately trauma has many co-occurring diagnoses such as substance abuse, eating disorders.
But that's a rough way to spend a year, and a lot of relationships did not survive. And they came home not so much traumatized by that, but traumatized by the loss of their friends.
And then the criteria a lot of times with PTSD is that there's avoidance of situations that remind them. There's triggers, there's a lot of times flashbacks or reoccurring the trauma event. So a person could be sitting and someone may say something and they may respond. Like for example with veterans, my father was a Vietnam vet, and I just remember growing up that anytime we heard a helicopter, he was a helicopter pilot, he would always drop to the floor. Well, the other day I was somewhere and I heard a helicopter and I automatically got scared. But the problem, like I was saying, is that people are still expected to function.
That's the burden they came home with. They also came home with, and I did it a little bit too, they came home with this experience that very few people have, where they were in a small group where every person in that group would die for everyone else. There was an absolute commitment to each other. Each person was completely necessary to everyone else. And there's a security of being in that situation. There's a utility in it, a purpose in it that you can't duplicate back home. And so one of the traumas, I think in some ways, the unspoken trauma of returning from combat is that the things that were happening out there, many of them were bad, but some of them were very intensely good. That bond, that group inclusion is almost a narcotic.
Senator Al Franken has introduced legislation which will set up a pilot program within the Department of Veterans Affairs to pair service dogs with veterans who have physical or mental wounds, including PTSD.
You've heard of dogs for the blind and helper dogs used in hospitals and schools, but Frankie has been trained to help Sergeant Alan Hill with his post-traumatic stress disorder. How's that even possible, you ask?
Having an animal, having a service dog there has proven to give physiological benefits such as decreased heart rate. It helps decrease anxiety, depression. It helps in so many aspects of, because unfortunately a lot of people who have PTSD also experience depression. Let's say a veteran who's been conditioned to say it's not safe, you don't let anyone see you weak, you don't let anyone see you cry, you don't tell anyone these are secrets. Well, then you have an animal that is unconditional and isn't going to share your secrets or tell. It's such a cathartic way, and it's such an unconditional way of showing love. And an animal or a service dog gives an unconditional love that is so healing for people, and especially for people who have shame. Just the effects of watching something so horrific.
It's sort of a, gives me a sense of security that, and it's a reminder, it's a sort of a physical reminder that I'm not in Iraq.
There's a lot of really brilliant and really amazing dogs out there that don't have to necessarily go through the process of specific training to be able to help somebody. I've had grown adults from like the Bronx, big men, veteran men, who will sit, before Kiva had couch privileges, that would sit on the floor and would talk with Kiva and would pet her and share things and would express emotions that they would not have. And they would look at her and she looks at them and it just gives them permission. It's like the golden ticket.
Mr. President, I believe that the most important issue for 2013 is to provide our veterans who suffer with PTSD the ability to obtain a service dog that will not only change their lives, but save it.